Hey there, Susan here with a quick note before we dive in. This is part two of a special conversation with Joe Casabona. We started over on his show, Streamline Solopreneur, where we talked about the concept of vibe coding, basically using AI as a partner in your development process instead of coding everything yourself. If you haven't listened to that first part yet, I definitely recommend starting there. You'll find the link right in the show notes. What if the difference between a chaotic, scope creep riddled client project and a calm, delivered on time system wasn't just better boundaries or more accurate estimating, but a completely different way to approach the project itself? Today, we're solving for calm. One KPI, one bottleneck, one business at a time. And I'm your host, Susan Bowles. As I mentioned, this is part two of a two-part conversation with Joe Casabona. Joe's a system architect for solopreneurs, a former web developer, and a fellow automations geek who loves all things tech. In part one over on Streamlined Solopreneur, we geeked out about the idea of vibe coding, which is basically using AI as your coding partner. You describe what you want built, and it writes the actual code for you. So if you're curious about the how of vibe coding, or what can go wrong when you treat AI like a magic wand, go listen to that first part. You'll find the link in the show notes. In the second half, we're talking about how Joe actually used vibe coding to keep a complex client project on track. We're digging into the bottlenecks he hit, the unexpected scope changes, and how he used AI not as a replacement for expertise, but as a systems design tool to keep both his business and his brain calm. Hey there. Are you looking for new ways to design and deliver your services in a calmer, more sustainable way? I've got just the thing for you. The Calm Service Design and Delivery Inspiration Swipe File. It's a free resource that I've developed that's packed with 60 plus services from over 40 real-world providers just like you. You can browse by service type, delivery method, scale, support level, whatever inspires you to rethink how you work. This swipe file is all about helping you create services that are not only profitable, but also aligned with a calmer business model. Head to beyondmargins.com/swipe, or just click the link in the show notes to grab your free copy today. So here's the setup. Joe took on a nonprofit client project, thinking it would be a pretty straightforward WordPress build. No custom code, no biggie, right? But if you've ever worked with clients before, you could probably guess what happened next. Midway through, he realized he needed advanced custom fields, complex user roles, and even a full Google Sheets macro system to make it all work. Basically, it got way more complicated, way faster than expected. This is usually the part where most consultants either burn the midnight oil trying to catch up to the original timeline, even though the scope has now ballooned, or they go with option two, blow up the budget. But instead, Joe pivoted. We are talking about vibe coding a client project and specifically using vibe coding as a tool in client services. So, talk to me about the project. What was the project? How did it come about? And you, as a developer, how did you decide not to write your own code, but to try and use vibe coding to accomplish the project?
Yeah, it was a lot of panic, basically. So I was a web developer by trade for 20 years. And then around the pandemic, I decided web development does not jive with the type of dad I want to be, right? Like, if you do big client projects and like something goes down on a Saturday, like you're kind of on the hook for that, right?
Especially when it's somebody's website.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if they're making money off of that website. And so like I don't do web design or development anymore. I wanted to get into coaching people in systems and consulting with people in systems. And I didn't want to write custom code because I didn't want to have to support it. But I will still do the occasional simple website, usually for a nonprofit organization that I believe in, right? And so like this, I don't think they'll mind me saying it at this point, but the nonprofit is called Sail Beyond Cancer. It means a lot to us. My father-in-law sails for them, and my mother-in-law passed away of cancer a few years ago. And so, um, I did some pro bono work for them last year, and then they wanted this big system that they said they had budget for. And the big piece of it was managing all of their sales, SAILS, with this giant this unwieldy Google sheet. And they want to have a portal. So I was like, oh, this is great. It'll be WordPress. I'll create some stuff using a plugin called Advanced Custom Fields. So again, no code. When something happens in the Google sheet, I'll send it to the WordPress portal. Done and done. My fatal mistake here was that I didn't talk to the head scheduler soon enough. So like a few folks walked me through what they envisioned, but I didn't understand how the actual user was going to use it. And then I also made a bunch of assumptions about the plugins I was using and the block editor, because I'm like, the block editor came out 7 years ago. Surely these issues are fixed now. They were not. And then the third assumption I made was that when you use Zapier with Google Sheets and you change a field, anytime that, or like a cell, right?
Yeah.
If you change a cell, anytime you change it, the zap will trigger. What I learned through this process was only unique values trigger the zap.
Oh, interesting.
So if they had a sale scheduled and then postponed, they wanted it to be deleted from the portal. And then when they scheduled it again, they wanted it to be sent back to the portal. Couldn't do that because the scheduled sale status was not unique. And so let's forget the WordPress code for a while, but like I vibe coded. There was a bunch of stuff that I realized needed custom code, and I just had ChatGPT write all of the WordPress code, which I could describe.
Yeah, I think let's talk about the process, because I think a lot of people, vibe coding, you and I are pretty early on when it comes to technology adoption. We both make our living by doing geeky API things,
Right.
and your average person doesn't necessarily understand API. And I think vibe coding, particularly because it's such a new term, new idea, I think it would be really helpful to hear what was the process that you used to have ChatGPT help you.
Yeah, great question. So ChatGPT, I've said before, or AI in general, has been my rubber duck. So I will talk through a problem with it. I'll ask it, hey, is there a solution that does this? And then while I am panicking because I scoped this project at, say, 20 hours, and I'm realizing that it's going to be closer to like 100 hours if I have to custom code this stuff. I'm like asking a bunch of stuff, and it said like, yeah, you would need a custom plugin for that. Do you want me to code that for you? And I thought, yes. Let's see what happens here.
Let me see how this goes.
And again, WordPress is like fully open source. So like it had a lot of material to learn from. But I needed some stuff with Advanced Custom Fields. This was the problem. Advanced Custom Fields is an incredible plugin for WordPress that allows you to add additional information to a post. And so I created this sales post with all of like the passengers, the captain, the crew, when the sale was, the vessel and the marina, all from the sheet. And then there's still not like a native way to display that in the block editor. You have to code a custom block. And I'm like, this is dumb. And so ChatGPT just wrote all of that for me.
So did you end up having to debug it? Did you test it and it was just fine?
Yeah. For I'm going to say 95% of the code it wrote for me. I just tested it and it was fine. And if it wasn't, it's because I didn't prompt it the right way.
So, how did you go about creating the prompts to get the right output? Because I think that's actually the challenge here.
Yeah.
Is I think at the beginning when AI first came out, there was a lot of talk about like prompt engineering
Right.
and that it mattered, and I had not found that to be true up until recently.
Yeah.
Recently, I've found that the prompts really do matter in the quality of the output because it's doing more, I think, than,
Yeah.
when originally when it came out and everybody was like, write me a LinkedIn post.
Right.
There wasn't the granularity of information that you needed because we weren't expecting it to write a
Right.
program or to be able to do things independently like it can now.
Yes. One of my LinkedIn posts that deeply upset the AI advocates early on was telling ChatGPT to act like a doctor is like telling George Clooney to act like a doctor. Like, they're not doctors. And so someone was like, it puts it in the right context. I'm like, do you need to tell it to act like a doctor, though? And since then, research has come out that when you tell it to act like something, it does improve the quality. I never told it to act like a programmer. It's stupid.
That's not like I did not
Like-
ever find success with have this personality or do this
Right.
thing. I like to tell it what I'm expecting. So
Yes.
these are the outcomes, or I need you to be a brainstorming partner with me. I want you to, poke holes in what I'm like, help me think through this, but don't just blow smoke up my ass.
Right, yeah. Don't just agree with me. That's
Yeah.
a good one. For this project, because I also helped it generate the proposal for me,
Mm.
I recorded all of the discovery call and then the requirements call and the kickoff. And I put that all into this project in ChatGPT. I said, help me come up with a proposal based on the requirements we come up with. And here's how I'm going to do it now. And so it knew all of that. And so I continued in that project, basically in that one chat. Hey, I need help with this. What should I use? What are my options? And so by the time it got to, do you want me to code this for you? It was already
had a lot of the
very
requirements.
familiar with what I needed. And so the main thing I did was I said, if I upload the advanced custom fields export of all the custom fields I created, can you code these things for me?
That's such a time saver.
Yeah. And it did it. And then it got even crazier because they have about 80 users on the site and the users could have multiple roles, which I didn't learn until later. So I was like, oh, we'll just assign them different roles. And so I found a plugin that allowed for multiple user roles, and they gave me a spreadsheet to import. So I gave it a CSV, and I said, here are all the users I need to import. I'm using this plugin that allows for multiple user roles. Can you create an import script that will import each user with the roles? And again, it did it flawlessly. And so that also saved me a bunch of time or money. Because this is the thing, right? I could have found premium plugins for all this.
Yeah.
But then I would have had to go to, and I'm sorry to all the premium plugin developers out there, but I would have had to go to the client and been like, hey,
Can we buy
Yeah,
this thing that
we're-
I didn't know that I needed?
yeah, I'm blowing up the budget unexpectedly, right? Vibe coding the WordPress aspect of it was so helpful. And WordPress is something that I've done for a long time. So I'm reviewing the code and saying oh, wow, this is actually the right way to do it. It's not creating custom tables when it doesn't need to. It's not using the wrong methodology to do stuff that could potentially break the site. It automatically created admin pages so I can turn things on and off if I needed to. It was really impressive. I do want to move on to the Zapier Google Sheet thing because that was also super helpful. So two things led me to needing this custom macro, right? Or app script, I think they call it
Yeah.
in Google Sheets.
It's a macro.
Yeah, yes. I get that Google Sheets is not a database, but
So many people use it as one, though.
Right.
I think because it's accessible, everybody has it, and it's something that everybody can understand how it works. Like, it feels much more approachable than like a relational database where
Yeah.
you need to understand relational databases
Right.
and database structure and
Right.
that kind of thing.
Even
Everybody
like
understands a
Airtable,
spreadsheet. Yeah.
right? Yes, yes. And so again, I have a chronic problem of if this feature is obvious to me, it's definitely in there. And so I thought, all right, well, if Zapier needs a unique value in a field to trigger a zap, I will move it from the status change, which can only be 1 of 5, to a timestamp. And that timestamp, I'll just say like, hey, anytime any row or cell changes, update the timestamp, right? Very common feature in databases. Not a built-in feature of Google Sheets.
I can kind of see that because, again, it's not a database. So
It's
something
not a
like Airtable
database.
is, in fact, a
Right.
database which has fields that you can say, when was this created? When was this updated? And it's
Right.
built into the characteristics of the software. But Google Sheets is just trying to be a spreadsheet.
Right.
People use it for all kinds of things, but it's
Yes.
just trying to be a spreadsheet.
And I thought for sure, if it's not native, then there's probably an extension. And there wasn't. And so I was like, ChatGPT, how do I do this? And it's like, oh, here's the code that you need to make this happen. And so I said, okay, here's the spreadsheet. When these columns change, update the timestamp. And so like the time is unique enough. And so I didn't know that app scripts or macros were like a real thing in Google Sheets.
No, I didn't know until relatively recently.
Yeah.
Like, I've built a bunch of macros in Excel and like,
right.
because that's what you used to have to do back in the day.
Right. That's how you would get Excel to do stuff.
Yeah.
And so like I simultaneously learned about this and then had the code. That took some debugging. And it's mostly because like I'm not as familiar with that. And so I didn't really know what to ask for.
Yep.
And then as I'm like doing this on the fly, I'm like, oh, well, I really want it in this case, in this condition. And I only want it on these sheets because it's also like multiple sheets. It was like a behemoth. And so like, I think if I had been clearer with exactly what I want, it would have probably come up with the code.
But I think it's an interesting counterpoint to you using vibe coding when you are in a system that you're very familiar with. You know, you can write custom code for WordPress.
Yes.
And in that case, it was very successful right out of the gate because it was benefiting from your knowledge of the existing system versus using vibe coding for something where, yes, if you know one kind of code, for the most part, you understand how coding structures work.
Right.
But going from one language to another is
Yeah.
not as straightforward.
Or environment, right?
Yeah,
like
where
I could say I want an iOS app that does this, but like I don't know. All I know about iOS apps is that you need like a developer account. But
Mhm.
like I don't know really how to describe an iOS app, especially the user interface. And like I've never done an iOS. So like it would also have to, which it's done for me before. How do I get this code where I need it to be?
that's the piece that I think is interesting in the different experiences between using vibe coding in a system you're familiar with versus using one where you're not.
Right.
You have to ask it a lot of questions to say, what do you need from me? What other information are you missing?
Yeah.
What documents would be helpful for me to provide? But it's not going to necessarily know it. I think it's difficult in like environments where you are not familiar with that structure. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Where like in a situation where it's a environment you're very familiar with, you know what you don't know and you know what to look for because you're
Right.
very familiar with how things can go off the rails.
Yes.
And so I think that is an interesting aspect where right now Vibe coding works really well in an environment where you know what it is, you know what you're trying to accomplish, you know what to look for. And I think it's a lot harder to do in environments where you don't necessarily aren't familiar with the coding environment. You're not
Yeah.
necessarily familiar with how that works or how it interacts because you just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
And it's not going to tell you what you don't know.
that's exactly right. And like, so even with like the WordPress project, like there are a few ways I could have added the code to the WordPress site. There's one very right way to do it. And then there is one very wrong way to do it that would be destructive. Like if you did it this way and the WordPress site updated, that code would be gone. And ChatGPT did a good job of explaining each of those things. But if I'm just in a rush and not paying attention, I might have done it the wrong way.
You're not going to
right?
know. And I think right now we're at a kind of an inflection point where the possibility is there and also the possibility to really mess things up where you're messing around where you don't know
Yeah.
what you're doing.
You still do need to know what you're doing. But in this case, it saved my butt. Like it really did. It allowed me to deliver the project on time and on budget. On budget for the client. It probably ended up taking me like about 10 hours more than I expected.
I mean, who hasn't scoped a project and then gone, well,
Yeah.
messed that one up?
Right. But I was looking at like triple or quadruple the amount of time.
Joe's use case is a great example of how tools, when used intentionally, can give us, as consultants, something like superpowers. They don't have to replace you, but if you understand how to harness them, they can support you in ways you might not expect. In this case, Joe managed to deliver his project on time, close to budget, and without sacrificing his weekends to scope creep. By letting AI handle the heavy technical lift, he protected his time and his client relationship. Instead of defaulting to overwork, he leaned on the lever of efficiency to rebuild the margin he would have otherwise lost. And this isn't just about coding. It was about designing a decision system that prioritized calm. What I love here is the subtlety. Joe didn't use AI to do more. He used it to protect the shape of the project and his role inside it. He stayed the architect, not the firefighter. It's a powerful reminder that the tools we use, AI included, aren't just about output. They're about reinforcing the kind of business and life we actually want. But let's zoom out just a little bit. What we just walked through, it wasn't really about AI or code. It was a snapshot of how to build a calmer business by intentionally pulling that lever of efficiency. And in this case, efficiency wasn't about moving faster. It was about reducing the load, lowering the decision fatigue, and building in margin. So here's your tiny action to help you calibrate towards calm. The next time a project starts to sprawl, pause and ask yourself, what problem am I actually solving? And is there a tool or a collaborator, whether that's human or AI, that could help me hold the boundary instead of absorbing it? That one shift can create so much more margin, not just in your calendar, but in your brain.